So therein lies a lot of problems. Obviously, we have a great number of very respected teachers and preachers and ministers and Christians out there that do teach that God may use evil, that Satan is under the ultimate dominion of God, if you will, that Satan is not really free to do whatever he will lest God give him permission. And they oftentimes quote Job in defending that position. And so how do you answer those Christians that would say, well, we also believe that God is good and that He is love, but the good and the love that we as finite humans understand is not necessarily a definition of the kind of good and the kind of love that God Himself is. God being a kind of love that we cannot perceive, perhaps is the kind of love that allows for interaction with Satan or using sickness and disease for a long-term greater good, a larger big picture good, and then ultimately that is good and is love. So how do you answer those folks that would cite the sovereignty of God and that you are somehow making God weaker or less powerful than he should be by saying He can't do evil for a good reason, for a good purpose?
Well, because you can't have it both ways. That's the reason why this Bible can be a standard, is because it is actually one way. There was a standard that God used when He created this earth. There were certain steps that He took that actually created the earth and can be reproduced again to this day. Can still be the very standard that He used to create life in the beginning, can still be used again. The other thing that you must... People want to just jump over there and look at Job, because so many people can find themselves either right now or in the past or probably sometimes in the future. They can see themselves in Job's position in some variant form or another. But what they have to remember is there was a standard at that time. There was a standard in place at that time, and he got outside of that standard. He got outside in the area of fear that he was not supposed to fear. He was upright with God, and he knew better than to fear. But if you read the story, you'll find out that he broke the hedge of protection that was part of the standard that he was to live by. Well, by doing that, that allowed calamity to come inside. Now, you've got to read the story. You've got to understand what Satan's part actually was there, and it's got some stuff in there that if you can't grasp the rest of it, if you don't understand your covenant relationship and the original covenant, if you can't understand who Jesus was, you'll have a hard time over there in Job. So that's why I'm real quick to tell people, stay out of Job until you got an idea who Jesus is.
Well, that brings up a good point. I think ultimately the point that we're coming to here is that the standard by which we measure is Jesus.
Absolutely.
That Jesus' life, his ministry that He walked in for 3.5 years, the way that He dealt with satanic and demonic spirits, the way He led and managed and governed His disciples, the way He interacted with the sick and the impoverished and the hurting and the sinful, that we can look at His life to determine who God is. Over in Matthew, Jesus says Himself that no man knows the Father save the Son. And the word knows there is a word that is the same word we use for the intimate physical relationship between a man and a woman, that Jesus has intimate knowledge, the highest level of intimate knowledge with the Father. And He says that no man has had this intimate knowledge except the Son. But then He goes on to say that also those that the Son reveals the Father to will have this intimate knowledge. And so it was an interesting thing when I went down this road with you 8 years ago to try to understand who God was. And for those of you that may not know, I'll tell this quick story. I was 25 years old. I'm 33 now. And I'm sitting at my coffee table with my Bible open, and I have it open to Job, actually. And I had been being told by Glenn and by a number of other people, and been listening to some teaching about that God was good, and that God was light and love and wholeness and health and all the wonderful things of life. And I was over here, and I believe that to be true, and so I wanted to be able to scripturally support it. So I went over into Job. I was like, man, no, this is the book everybody goes to prove that God isn't good all the time. I'm going to have to read it for myself to find out. And I was having some real trouble just with the text, and I did not yet have that standard clearly defined. I couldn't measure yet. I was beginning to look at my ruler didn't have any lines on it yet. I didn't have any real way of knowing what was right or what was wrong. And so I got Glenn on the phone, and I said, man, I got to have a real problem with this. And he started laughing, and he said, stay out of Job. And of course I said, oh, blasphemy. He's saying to tear a book out of the Bible, you know, how dare he? And I said, but Glenn, over in Revelation it says this and this. And he said, oh, stay out of Revelation too. And I said, oh my gosh, this guy must be part of a cult. He's a heretic. We've got to burn him at the stake. How dare he say to not look at a particular book? But the point that Glenn was trying to make was that Job is the oldest book in the Bible that we have record of. Historians, theologians believe that Job is the oldest written book in the Bible. We know that Jesus came and Matthew said that He's the only one that ever had intimate knowledge of the Father, and that the only people that could ever have intimate knowledge of the Father are those that He would reveal them to. So that tells me that from Adam to Jesus, Jesus was the first man that ever had true, intimate, knowing knowledge of God. So that tells me that the writer of Job didn't have intimate knowledge of God. He couldn't have, or Jesus would be a liar. And so it was starting down this path that I realized that I had to look at the life of Jesus. And since Jesus was the only one that knew God, we had to look at the descriptions that Jesus gave of the character of God. The Father that Jesus revealed was altogether different than the Pharisees and the Sadducees. I mean, who are the people that he had the biggest trouble with in debating what kind of character God was? It was the religious people that studied the Bible, that had Job and had the Old Testament, had Isaiah and all those books. And so it was a revelatory thing for me. And what Glenn is getting at is this standard that he is suggesting that we live by is one that looks at the life of Jesus, that looks at the character of God that Jesus revealed, the Father that's in the story of the prodigal son. It's an altogether different guy that had ever been described in the Old Testament. You know, when Jesus was told by the Pharisees that you cast out devils in the name of Satan, and Jesus said, can Satan cast out Satan? His kingdom can't stand if he stands against himself. So I just want to reiterate what the standard that Glenn's ministry has been able to clearly define is one that looks at the life of Jesus and determines who God is from His ministry and life alone.